A single mistake on a beach in France, one wrong turn in the frozen wasteland of Russia, a surprise attack that nobody saw coming. These moments didn't just change battles, they rewrote history itself. The fate of entire nations hung on decisions made in split seconds. Ordinary people became legends, and legends crumbled into dust. The Second World War wasn't just the biggest conflict in human history. It was a cosmic game of chess where entire civilizations were the pieces. We're diving deep into the 10 battles that decided who would rule the world and who would disappear forever. Brace yourself for stories so wild, so heart-pounding that Hollywood couldn't make them up. Hit that like button if you're ready for some epic history. And don't forget to share this with anyone who loves incredible true stories. Your support keeps these amazing tales coming. The sun was just climbing over the Pacific when Commander Mitsuo Fuchida looked down at the peaceful harbor below. American battleships sat like sleeping whales, their crews probably dreaming of home. Nobody knew that in the next 2 hours, everything would change forever. Japan had been planning this attack for months. They needed to knock out America's Pacific Fleet before the United States could stop their expansion across Asia. The plan was simple but deadly. Hit hard, hit fast, and pray America would sue for peace. At 7:48 a.m., the first bombs started falling. The USS Arizona exploded like a volcano, taking 1,077 sailors with her. The Oklahoma flipped over like a toy boat. Chaos erupted everywhere as American sailors ran to battle stations, many still in their pajamas. But here's the twist that nobody expected. Japan made a huge mistake. They hit the battleships but missed the aircraft carriers, the ships that would actually win the war. Even worse, they turned a peaceful nation into a furious one. President Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy. But the real meaning was clear. You just made the biggest mistake in human history. America lost 2,400 people that day, but they gained something far more dangerous: total commitment to winning the war. Japan thought they were eliminating a threat. Instead, they created their own destruction. Hitler had conquered Europe. France had fallen. Only one stubborn island stood between the Nazi war machine and total victory. Britain was alone, outgunned, and staring down the most powerful air force ever assembled. The German Luftwaffe had 2,600 aircraft. Britain's Royal Air Force had just 700 fighters. The math was simple. Germany should have won in weeks. But math doesn't account for the human spirit. Every day, young pilots, many barely old enough to shave, climbed into their Spitfires and Hurricanes, knowing they might not come home. The average life expectancy of a British fighter pilot was just 4 weeks. 4 weeks to live or die for freedom. The battle raged across Britain's summer skies. German bombers tried to destroy British airfields, factories, and cities. British fighters rose to meet them day after day until both sides were bleeding aircraft and pilots they couldn't replace. Then came the turning point. On September 15th, the Luftwaffe launched their biggest attack ever. They sent 1,500 aircraft to finish off the RAF once and for all. British radar operators watched in horror as their screens filled with enemy contacts. But when the dust settled, the Germans had lost 60 aircraft to Britain's 26. Hitler realized his air force was being destroyed piece by piece. On October 12th, he quietly cancelled the invasion of Britain. Winston Churchill said it best: "Never was so much owed by so many to so few." Those few hundred pilots had saved not just Britain, but the entire free world. At 3:15 a.m. on June 22nd, the largest military operation in human history began with a single word: Dortmund. That was the code word that unleashed 3.8 million German soldiers, 3,050 tanks, and 2,070 aircraft against the Soviet Union. Hitler's plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Crush the Soviet military in 6 weeks, capture Moscow before winter, and claim the vast riches of Russian land. The German war machine had never lost a campaign. Why should this be different? For the first few weeks, it looked like Hitler was right. German armies advanced so fast they captured entire Soviet divisions before they knew what hit them. In just 5 months, the Germans took 3.3 million prisoners and came within sight of Moscow's spires. But then winter arrived early, and with it came the twist that changed everything. The Germans had prepared for a quick summer campaign. They didn't have winter uniforms, winter oil for their tanks, or winter experience fighting an enemy that had been doing this for centuries. Soviet forces, wearing white winter camouflage and fighting with desperate fury for their homeland, began pushing back. Every mile the Germans had gained in summer, they now had to fight for all over again in the brutal cold. By December, German soldiers were freezing to death in their summer uniforms while Soviet forces launched massive counterattacks. Operation Barbarossa, which was supposed to end the war, instead guaranteed that Germany would have to fight on 2 fronts until their destruction. The invasion failed because Hitler forgot the most important rule of warfare: never underestimate your enemy's will to survive. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was planning the perfect trap. He would attack Midway Island with a massive fleet, forcing the weakened American Pacific Fleet into a battle they couldn't win. It was a plan so good it couldn't fail, except for one small problem: the Americans had broken Japan's secret code. Admiral Chester Nimitz knew exactly when and where the Japanese were coming. He positioned his 3 aircraft carriers, all he had left after Pearl Harbor, in the perfect spot to ambush the ambushers. On the morning of June 4th, Japanese aircraft attacked Midway, while their carriers remained vulnerable, their decks packed with fuel and bombs for a second strike. American torpedo bombers found the Japanese fleet first, but their attack was a disaster. Almost every American plane was shot down without hitting a single target. The Japanese thought they had won. Their fighters were busy chasing the last torpedo bombers when American dive bombers appeared overhead like angels of death. What happened next took exactly 4 minutes. American bombs rained down on 3 Japanese aircraft carriers loaded with fuel and ammunition. The Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu exploded in massive fireballs that could be seen for miles. In 4 minutes, Japan lost half their experienced carrier pilots, men who had trained for 10 years and could never be replaced. The 4th carrier, Hiryu, managed to damage the American carrier Yorktown before being sunk itself. Japan went into the battle with the most powerful carrier fleet in the world. They limped away with their naval aviation in ruins. The rising sun had reached its highest point and begun its long fall toward defeat. The city that bore Stalin's name was about to become Hitler's graveyard. What started as a simple military objective turned into the most brutal urban warfare in human history. German forces had pushed deep into the Soviet Union, and Stalingrad was the key to controlling the Volga River and the oil fields beyond. Take Stalingrad, and the Soviet war machine would run out of fuel. Simple. But when German troops entered the city in September 1942, they found something they hadn't expected: an enemy that refused to die. Soviet defenders turned every building into a fortress, every street into a killing field. The fighting was insane. Soldiers fought hand-to-hand in bombed-out buildings. They used sewers and tunnels to appear behind enemy lines. The average life expectancy of a Soviet soldier in Stalingrad was 24 hours. For officers, it was 3 days. German General Friedrich Paulus commanded the 6th Army, the elite force that had never been defeated. But in Stalingrad, his soldiers were being ground to pieces, house by house, room by room. Then winter arrived, and with it came Operation Uranus. While German forces were tied down in the city, Soviet armies smashed through weaker Romanian and Hungarian forces on the flanks, surrounding the entire German 6th Army. Hitler ordered Paulus to fight to the death. For months, 300,000 German soldiers slowly starved and froze in the ruins of Stalingrad. When Paulus finally surrendered on February 2nd, only 91,000 were still alive. Most of them would die in Soviet prison camps. Germany lost an entire army at Stalingrad, but more than that, they lost the myth of German invincibility. After Stalingrad, everyone knew the war would end with German defeat. General Dwight Eisenhower stared at the weather reports and made the decision that would determine the fate of millions. The invasion of Europe had been postponed once already due to storms. Another delay might mean waiting months for the right conditions to align again. "Okay, let's go," he said simply. Those 3 words launched the largest seaborne invasion in history. At dawn on June 6th, 156,000 Allied soldiers would storm the beaches of Nazi-occupied France. Success meant the beginning of the end for Hitler. Failure meant the war might drag on for years. The night before, Eisenhower wrote a letter taking full responsibility if the invasion failed. He never sent it, but he kept it in his pocket as paratroopers loaded into their planes and landing craft headed for the French coast. At Omaha Beach, everything went wrong. The pre-invasion bombing missed its targets. German defenses were stronger than expected. American soldiers were pinned down on the beach as machine guns cut them down in waves. For hours, it looked like D-Day might end in disaster. But slowly, incredibly, small groups of soldiers began moving forward. A sergeant here, a lieutenant there, leading by example as they charged up the cliffs into the teeth of German fire. By the end of the day, Allied forces had established a foothold in Nazi Europe. The cost was terrible. Over 4,400 Allied soldiers died that day, but the payoff was everything. Hitler now faced the nightmare he had tried to avoid, a real two-front war. The liberation of Europe had begun, and nothing would ever be the same. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa was leading the last great Japanese carrier fleet into battle, hoping to destroy the American invasion of the Mariana Islands. He had 9 carriers and 473 aircraft. It should have been enough, but this wasn't 1942 anymore. American pilots were better trained, their planes were superior, and their radar could see the Japanese coming from hundreds of miles away. The battle started when Japanese aircraft launched their first attack on June 19th. American fighter pilots, waiting in perfect position, tore into the incoming formations like hungry wolves. What followed became known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. American pilots shot down Japanese aircraft so fast they started running out of ammunition. By the end of the first day, Japan had lost 400 aircraft and experienced pilots they could never replace. On June 20th, American carrier aircraft found the Japanese fleet and sank 3 carriers, including Ozawa's flagship. The once mighty Japanese carrier force was reduced to a handful of ships, with almost no experienced pilots left to fly from them. Japan's naval aviation, the force that had terrorized the Pacific for 3 years, died in the Philippine Sea. From this point on, Japanese carriers were just expensive targets waiting to be sunk. Hitler was desperate. Allied armies were closing in on Germany from both east and west. But the master manipulator had one last card to play: a massive surprise attack through the same forest where he had achieved his greatest victory in 1940. Operation Watch on the Rhine would split the British and American armies, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and force the Western Allies to negotiate a separate peace. It was brilliant, desperate, and probably insane. On December 16th, 200,000 German soldiers and 600 tanks smashed through American lines in the Ardennes. The attack achieved complete surprise. Entire American units were overrun before they knew what hit them. For a week, it looked like Hitler's gamble might pay off. German forces advanced 50 miles, creating a huge bulge in Allied lines. At Bastogne, surrounded American paratroopers received a German surrender demand. General Anthony McAuliffe's response became legendary: nuts. But Hitler had made a fatal mistake. He had committed his last reserves to an attack he couldn't sustain. When the weather cleared on December 23rd, Allied aircraft appeared in the skies like avenging angels, destroying German supply columns and tanks. By January, German forces were retreating, leaving behind the wreckage of 120,000 casualties and 600 tanks. Hitler had gambled everything on one last throw of the dice and lost it all. The road to Berlin was now wide open. From the air, Iwo Jima looked like a worthless piece of volcanic rock. But this 8-square-mile island was the key to Japan's defense. From Iwo Jima, American bombers could reach every major Japanese city. Japanese General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had turned the island into a fortress. Over 21,000 Japanese soldiers waited in tunnels, caves, and bunkers, ready to sell their lives as expensively as possible. The American invasion began on February 19th with the largest pre-assault bombardment in Pacific War history. For 3 days, battleships and bombers pounded the island until it looked like the surface of the moon. But when 30,000 Marines stormed ashore, they found the Japanese very much alive and ready to fight. Every cave had to be cleared with flamethrowers and explosives. Every yard of ground cost American lives. On February 23rd, Marines raised an American flag on Mount Suribachi. The photograph became the most famous image of World War II, but the battle was far from over. Fighting continued for another month in the island's hellish terrain. When the guns finally fell silent on March 26th, almost every Japanese defender was dead. American casualties were staggering: 6,800 killed and 19,200 wounded. For every square yard of Iwo Jima, an American had been killed or wounded. But the Americans had their airbase. B-29 bombers could now escort fighters all the way to Japan and back. The end was coming. Stalin wanted Berlin, and he was willing to pay any price to get it. 2 Soviet army groups, over 1 million soldiers and 6,000 tanks, were racing toward Hitler's capital for the final battle of the European War. Hitler, hiding in his underground bunker, still believed he could win. Maybe the Americans and Soviets would fight each other. Maybe his secret weapons would save Germany. Maybe the German people would rise up in a final desperate defense of their homeland. He was wrong about everything. Soviet forces crossed the Oder River on April 16th and smashed through German defenses like a sledgehammer through glass. Within days, they were fighting in Berlin's suburbs against a mix of regular soldiers, old men, and teenagers. The Battle of Berlin was urban warfare at its most brutal. Soviet soldiers fought building to building, floor by floor, sometimes room by room. German defenders, knowing defeat meant the end of everything, fought with the fury of the doomed. By April 30th, Soviet soldiers were just blocks from Hitler's bunker. That afternoon, the man who had promised a 1,000-year Reich put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. His empire had lasted exactly 12 years. On May 2nd, the last German defenders surrendered. The war in Europe was over. Berlin lay in ruins, and with it, Hitler's dream of German world domination. But the most incredible truth about these 10 battles lies deeper than strategy or technology. None of them had to happen the way they did. Every single one turned on moments of pure chance, individual courage, or split-second decisions that could have gone either way. Consider the possibilities. The Japanese finding the American carriers at Midway. Hitler preparing for winter in Russia. Weather too violent for D-Day. One German patrol spotting Soviet preparations at Stalingrad. Change any one of these moments, and you change everything. The world we live in today exists because of decisions made by ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. They didn't know they were making history. They were just trying to survive another day. That's the real lesson of these 10 battles. History isn't made by inevitable forces or grand strategies. It's made by individuals who chose to keep fighting when everything seemed hopeless, who made the right decision when they had seconds to think, who stood their ground when running would have been easier. These battles show us that the impossible can happen, that the underdog can win, and that ordinary people can change the world. They remind us that freedom isn't free. It's paid for in blood by people who believed that some things are worth dying for. The Second World War ended 80 years ago, but its lessons are eternal. Evil can be defeated, democracy can survive, and sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys really do win. If this epic journey through history got your blood pumping, smash that like button and share this video with everyone you know. These incredible true stories deserve to be told and retold. Subscribe to our channel for more amazing historical adventures that will blow your mind. History isn't boring, it's the most exciting story ever told, and we're just getting started.